So it's about disease versus symptom. And we have, for the first time, our ability to start looking at these things as symptoms. So let me go back and talk about the microglia. So basically, we stepped back and we said, okay, if the microglia are the mediators of inflammation in the body, in the brain, what is it that sets off the microglia? And the answer are DAMPs and PAMPs. DAMPs are damage-associated molecular patterns, and PAMPs are pathogen-associated molecular patterns. What does that mean? Anytime a neuron is injured, it sends out a bunch of chemical messages, and it calls in the microglia. The microglia come, and its job is several things. Its job is to destroy any pathogens that are in the area. Its job is to destroy any damaged neurons, so you're not getting shorting out all over the place. Okay? So its job is to create inflammation to initiate the repair process. That's what it's supposed to do. Then it sends out another set of chemicals to call in everybody to get the repair process going. Brain-derived neurotropic factors, there's a bunch of things that call in the healing factors in addition to that. And then it goes back to sleep, normally. In people with chronic pain, chronic depression, other neuropsychiatric diseases, they do not go back to sleep. They stay upregulated, and they continue pouring out lots of inflammatory factors. So we sat down and we got really specific about the things that cause neuronal damage. And we started to look, and what we found were things like hypoxia. What causes hypoxia? Well, about 5% of the US population goes to bed every night and shuts off the oxygen to their brain. It's called sleep apnea. We've only diagnosed about 15 to 20% of the people suffering with this condition. So the majority of people who are still going to bed every night and shutting off the oxygen in their brain are still going to bed every night, shutting off the oxygen in their brain, not knowing. So hypoxia is certainly one thing. Ischemia, loss of blood supply to the brain. Stroke, obviously, is the big thing there. But other things such as postural orthostatic tachycardic syndrome. These are people who have trouble maintaining their blood pressure when they stand up, and the blood pressure drops. They get lightheaded, they get dizzy, they can actually pass out. So people suffering with POTS, and people suffering with POTS can be 10 years old. So imagine starting at 10 years of age, where you're struggling through life, and you keep knocking down the blood supply to your brain every time you stand up. Consequences that has very long term in your growth and development. Other things that create the problem are infections, Lyme disease, certainly high on the list, and reactivation of old viruses. But if you want to know what microglial activation looks like, anybody ever have the flu? Fever, chills, generalized body pain and ache. All right? That's what microglial activation looks like. Now imagine living with that going on every single day. So chronic fatigue syndrome is one of the presentations of neuroinflammatory disease. Fibromyalgia is one of the presentations of neuroinflammatory disease. Toxins, anything that will damage neurons, will potentially set off the microglia. So heavy metals, lead, mercury, all right? Anybody over the age of 50 has potentially had fairly significant lead exposure. Why? We had leaded gasoline until the 1970s, and there was lead in paint until the 1990s. Now, everybody was focused on eating paint chips, except how many times did we move, renovate, sand down, and breathe in all the fumes from that stuff? It was all lead-based paints. How many people like sushi? All right? We have massive amounts of mercury being dumped into our oceans, and the high-end fish, the tuna, the swordfish, are sucking up the mercury. And so as we're eating more and more sushi, we're finding much higher levels of mercury in people. So toxins. Toxins can also you've heard of a thing called sick building syndrome? Sick building syndrome is where black mold is growing in these buildings. All right? So people who've been exposed to black molds, about 20% of people can't process them, the end result of which the molds accumulate in their bodies. the toxins of these molds accumulate in their bodies. And voila, we end up with a poisoned brain, an inflamed brain. Celiac disease affects 1% of the population. Gluten intolerance affects 6 to 8% of the population. All of these things cause inflammation in the brain. All right? Celiac disease can present as only a neurologic condition. I had a 17-year-old young man who was brought to me, severe depressive disorder. Been hospitalized multiple times, failed on all the antidepressant medications, tried to kill himself. Because we believe that this is a manifestation, a symptom of a neuroinflammatory disease, we did our usual neuroinflammatory workup. He had celiac disease. Pure, out-and-out celiac disease with no gastrointestinal symptoms. Off gluten and other things in order to quiet down his gut. He is off all his antidepressant medications. He is back, he finished high school, is able to now go on to college. He is no longer depressed. He never had depression. He had neuroinflammation caused by celiac disease. So we want to be attentive to these things. If we think about these things as a neuroinflammatory disease, we begin to come up with a very different set of questions to ask people. And more importantly, is we come up with another set of answers. So you've got to step back from this stuff and stop the blocks and stop the opioids and say, first off, when did all this begin? Because the other thing we learned from neuroglial physiology is that they learn. The more you activate them, the more times they get hit, the more they will stay upregulated. So the point is that there's a point at which you remove the things that are causing the inflammatory response, but the inflammation continues to go on. You now have almost an autoimmune type response because the microglia are part of they are the innate immune system in the central nervous system. Now they're self-firing, and they continue firing, and they do a lot of damage while they're doing that. So you really have to look at the problem twofold. One is, what is it that set them up to begin with? Okay, and secondly, what do we need to do to shut them down now that they're already upregulated? We have a lot we need to learn. But we now know where to go look. We now know what questions to begin to ask. Okay? One other example, a young woman who came to see me had been kicked in the knee and developed swelling of the knee and inability to walk on that knee. The knee should have healed in a couple of weeks, nothing. Pain persisted and persisted. And after months of this going on and her on crutches, somebody finally figured out the condition was reflex sympathetic dystrophy, or chronic regional pain syndrome. It's a horrific pain problem. And so she's struggling with this, and she now begins the Magical Mystery Tour. And she goes to some of the finest medical centers in the country. She finally ends up at one center in which the way they treat these kids, if they get them before the age of 16, is to put them through this incredibly rigorous physical therapy in an attempt to reset the receptors. You ask them what they're doing, and they say, well, we're not sure, but it seems to work. But it doesn't work for 17-year-olds. So there's this cutoff point where the brain can't quite unlearn things, at least not in that manner. So they put her through this, and sure enough, she actually gets significantly improved. But after the program's over, she starts developing chronic daily headaches. She has more fatigue. She's starting to lose ground. So when I saw her, we backed up and we said, okay, 15 was lovely. What was your life like prior to that? Well, prior to that, she had had 2 cases of Lyme disease and a poisonous spider bite. Okay? So we said, maybe, is there a persistence of Lyme? And the answer was no in her case. Then we said, okay, is there a possibility of toxins as a result of the spider bites and the Lyme that was in her system? Because why does a 15-year-old kid get kicked in the knee and continue to have pain for the next 4 years of her life? And through our investigations, we found, in fact, she had lots of toxins in her system. More importantly is when we removed those toxins from her system, she got all better. all better. Pain completely stopped, the headache stopped, the energy came back, we shipped her off to college. As a gift, she decided to get another poisonous spider bite. How many have been bit by a poisonous spider? Twice. Everything comes rip-roaring back on her. We treat her again, everything goes away. So we have to stop thinking that this is the problem and start back further and say, okay, what led us up to this point? And through that process, we have found a great deal of success in the process of treating people. We're not as good as I want to be yet. And so I wrote this book, for one, to try and get people to begin to understand this way of thinking better. And now, we're a year out. Paperback from the book is coming out next month, so I hope you'll buy it and pass it on to others. But what we're doing is we're launching a foundation. A foundation for total recovery dedicated to finding a cure for neuroinflammatory disease. I'm taking part of the proceeds from the book and seeding the foundation. The foundation will have several purposes. One purpose is education. We want to be able to educate people about what these diseases are in fact and other ways that we can potentially treat them with greater success. All right, enough with the narcotics, enough with all the blocks. Again, there's a time and a place for those. But now we want to talk about potentially curing these problems. And the only way we're going to cure them is to acknowledge that they're neuroinflammatory diseases and that what we're looking at is a symptom of neuroinflammatory diseases. So now we have to find out what's at the basis of this. We have some understanding, but we have more to go. We want to create communities. We want to create communities of people who are mostly suffering individually and in silence. Getting patients, chronic pain patients, patients suffering with depression, communicating with each other, supporting each other, sharing solutions with each other, and doing so in a structured environment, in an online environment that will allow them to gain the support and the help that they need, that they've at present been denied, because there's so much isolation out there between both providers and the patients. I've had too many patients come to me saying that their physician simply said to them, I don't know what else to do for you, go. All right? This is horrible. So we need a community that supports not only the patients, but also their caregivers. And we need a community that supports the physicians, because this is a tough problem. And we have physicians getting overwhelmed, not knowing how to manage these people. So we want to put tools in the hands of physicians to be able to manage these cases better. The big thing we want to do is some research, because I think we're going about this all wrong. So what I want to do is take a 50,000-foot view. Now, we have been taking a 100,000-foot view so far, because the one thing both chronic pain and depression have is that you tell us you have it, and we believe you, or not. There is no blood test we can do, there's no x-ray we can do, there's no scan we can do that says, you have chronic pain. You have depression. This is what's called a biomarker. If you have diabetes, I can measure your blood and I can find that your blood sugars are high. If you have thyroid disease, I can measure your blood and find that your thyroid is too high or too low. I do not have that test available for chronic pain and depression. So what we want to do is go find it. The thing is, I got a reasonably good idea of where to go look. So what we want to do is raise enough money to be able to support all of these things, with the biggest thing being the research. And the research, what we want to do is take a big perspective, and I think we're going to end up redefining many disease categories. I think we're going to find a much more individualized way to define these diseases by looking at people's genetics, looking at the way they're processing information that comes into their body, these metabolomics and how they're faulty on it, looking at inflammatory markers in their body, and looking at things like the gut microbiome, okay? So all of these things, I think, as we analyze all of this data and put it together, we're going to come up with a series of biomarkers that will be able to say, okay, you fall in this category, you fall in that category. It'll be much more individualized. And more importantly, it'll allow us to be much more targeted in our treatment. The biomarkers, if I'm correct on this, will also allow for several things. One is we can diagnose you with the condition. Two is we can follow the progression of our treatments and see how you're responding. Three, perhaps the most exciting piece of this, is because this occurs as a result of a process and not an event, we can pick up people before they manifest as chronic pain and depression. Pick up the neuroinflammatory condition at a much earlier stage, treat it there, and prevent the eventual occurrence of these conditions. That would be very cool, would it not? So that's the goal. That's what we want to be doing with the foundation. And we'll be launching the foundation next month. We've been working hard. Marjorie Connell in the back is our executive director. Stand up and wave. And so we're creating a 501(c) organization. That's why it's a tax exempt, so people can donate to it. We need help, and we'll take help in pretty much any and all shapes we can find it. In order to do this, it's a big task. All right? We're going to need a lot of money. We're going to need serious money to do this off. I'm betting in the order of about $10 million. This will be one of the largest, if not the largest, private foundation effort to try and find a cure for chronic pain and depression, for neuroinflammatory diseases. So I hope you're willing to help, and I thank you very much for your attention this evening. So, any questions?